Town Hall. As you know, I've been holding town halls in every ward since the beginning of my term 5 years ago. And of course, from these town halls, we get to learn a lot from our residents and learn the direction you'd like to take the city in many cases, and also get to answer any questions that you might have. Now, of course, in the past, we've done these live. Pre-COVID, we did these at Fairgrounds in Ward 6's for the Ward 6 town halls. But in view of COVID, we've decided to try to do them virtually. So here we are on Zoom and over the internet. We have done this once before. We've done one other town hall in this virtual manner, and that was a week or so ago in Ward 7. And of course, now we're in Ward 6. So what we try, and I want to thank you all for coming, and we will be taking questions and comments as we go on. But the way we normally go ahead is that I tell you a little bit about what's going on with the city, raise a few subjects, and with some help from some of the people who work for the city, and then we answer your questions and comments. Now we have some written questions that were submitted in advance. That's very helpful. And then I think we're going to take questions in the chat box or in some other fashion once we get a little further on. Now with us, I know we have, in addition to myself, we have Bobby Bagley, who's the Director of Public Health and Community Services. She's very focused on our COVID-19 response. We may have Alderman Rick Dowd, who can answer some questions about oh yes, I see Rick there. Answer some questions about the middle school project, which has begun and is proceeding very well at the Fairgrounds Middle School. And we may have Sarah Marchant a little later on to talk about the city's master plan. And I see that Kim Kleiner is on as well, and she can answer any questions that may come up in her area of responsibility. But let me first talk with you about COVID-19. Now the city, of course, and we want to encourage you to wear your masks. I just took it off before the broadcast began. Wash your hands and continue to do social distancing in order to protect everyone. We've made a lot of sacrifices over the last 6 months or 7 months, 8 months since this pandemic began. We've been wearing our masks. We haven't been traveling. We've been avoiding crowds and missing visits with family and a lot of other things. But by working together, by making these sacrifices, which are really painful for everyone, we have been able to limit the spread of the virus and help contain it, certainly to a much greater degree than would have been true if we didn't take all these measures. I want you to be particularly cautious over the next couple of months, because as we knew from the scientists way back from the beginning, there are medical experts, and that's who we are working with here in the city of Nashua. And we're following the advice of our public health officials, our Board of Health, and as well as medical experts from around the country. What we've been hearing for some time is that the number of coronavirus cases would rise in the fall as weather got colder, as people began to spend more time indoors. And that's certainly what we're seeing. Here in Nashua, as of Monday, we had 150 active cases. That's 150 coronavirus patients who are still have the disease. And we had 263 contacts, people that those 150 positive patients came into contact with and were exposed and could have been transmitted the disease. Now, this is 150 cases is much higher than we had over the summer. There were times when we were down to about 25 active cases with maybe 50 or 60 contacts. But now we've seen our numbers rise. Again, this is happening throughout the country. We see that in states where they aren't taking as many precautions, some states in the Midwest, in the Dakotas, and some states in the South, that the cases have exploded and they have far more cases proportionate to the population than New York ever had. And we, at one time, we thought that New York was, of course, the kind of the worst it could get. Well, it wasn't. Now, this afternoon, just to give you some background, I was on a Zoom meeting with a woman, a medical doctor, Dr. Ruth Caron, Karron of Johns Hopkins, which is Johns Hopkins Medical School is very, very involved in combating the coronavirus. And she is, in addition to some other titles and positions, she, Dr. Caron, is head of the Johns Hopkins Vaccine Initiative. And of course, she is reiterating that we need to really be careful this fall because we know that the next couple of months are going to be a spike all across the country. But she was, in terms of trying to see some light at the end of the tunnel, Dr. Caron was saying, yes, we need to continue to be careful. We need to be particularly careful for the next 2 months, but that she's optimistic that we will get a vaccine, one that has been thoroughly tested and tried out, that we'll get that by the end of this year or maybe early next year. Dr. Caron, who's watching all the vaccine trials very carefully, was saying that the trials that are now going on are very large compared with many drug trials, that there are 30 to 45,000 people in each trial group, that each of the makers of a vaccine or proposers of a vaccine is running. So each of these developers of the vaccine are working with 30 to 45,000 people. They're doing double-blind testing, meaning that neither the group is divided in two. Some people actually get the vaccine, some people get a placebo of some kind, and the double-blind means that neither the recipient, the patient that is receiving the vaccine, or possibly the placebo, neither that person nor the people administering the vaccine understand which dose is real and which is the placebo. And of course, the reason for that is they then compare the results among people who have the real vaccine as compared with people who just got a placebo to see how effective it is. And what we've heard is that at least the preliminary test on a vaccine being run on a vaccine developed by Pfizer is that it might be 90% effective. In other words, protect as many as 90%. But it's very preliminary, nothing final. But one message that Dr. Caron wanted us to deliver is that the people should not be concerned about taking this vaccine once it's developed, because they're being very careful about the way that they test it and the way that they're running these trials. So she is confident that once we get the vaccine, it will be safe and people should feel comfortable using it. Now, of course, once it comes, there won't be enough for everyone right away. They will have a prioritized list in terms of who can get the vaccine. First, it will be first responders, people who work in hospitals and the like, medical professionals. Then, probably more vulnerable populations, some of our seniors. Of course, we know that, and we've learned, of course, over these past months, that senior citizens, people over 60 are much more vulnerable to the disease than younger people. Even though the younger people can certainly get the disease and can be fatal for them as well.
Right.
But the seniors would be a second group of people that would be a priority group. And then they would work throughout to spread the vaccine to anybody who wishes to be vaccinated throughout the entire population. Now, public health here in Nashua and Bobby Bagley is on the call, and I'll introduce her in a little bit. They are working very carefully with all of our 150 positive cases, all of the patients who've tested positive. What they do is they figure out who that patient has been in contact with around the time they contracted the virus. And then they talk with those contacts to make them aware that they potentially were exposed, to make them aware that they should quarantine, that they should be on the lookout for symptoms, and that they should probably get tested. And the reason for that, of course, is so that the virus does not spread around without people realizing that they might be contagious, that they might have contracted the disease. This is a proven method to limit the spread of a virus like this. So public health is working with, as of Monday, about 263 active contacts. Now I'm going to ask Bobby to just give you a little more detail so you can meet her and learn a little bit more about what public health is up to. I just have to say they're doing a great job. Public health nurses have been working 7 days a week in many cases to follow all of the positive patients, the people who they're helping. And having contracted COVID-19 myself, I mean, and working with public health, I know that they call very regularly, check up on symptoms, see how people are doing. They're just doing a tremendous job in protecting the community. I thought I would mention a couple of other things that are going on so that you would be aware of them. We are, here in Nashville, we are facing, turning to the budget, we are facing some considerable budget pressures now, coming from a number of directions. First of all, we have seen that over the last couple of years, that healthcare costs, the healthcare that we offer our city employees, the costs of that have been going up fairly dramatically. 2 years in a row, the total cost has gone up $3 million a year. Now that $6 million equates to a 3% tax increase. So it's putting considerable pressure on the budget and on the tax rate. Another thing that's going on is, but we have a plan to try to reduce the effect and to reduce the cost of healthcare. The plan that has been developed and Kim Kleiner is on would change the deductibles that are offered that need to be paid when certain procedures and medications are required. And in that situation, drug deductibles go up a little bit, and deductibles for inpatient hospital go up as well. But if we can implement this change across the entire city workforce, it will save all of us a lot of money. And the interesting thing is that it also saves the employee money, because the amount that they have to pay out of their paychecks on a weekly basis, and most employees pay 20% of the monthly cost, the amount that gets deducted from the paycheck would actually go down. So most employees would actually see a benefit from the changes we proposed. Now, one thing that we need to ensure is that these changes get initiated for all groups of employees. No exceptions, no exclusions. And the reason for that is that if one group of employees is excluded, is given an exception, then of course every other group of employees will want the same thing. Now, we've had 3 or 4 groups of employees for whom we've been able to implement this change. Some of the city hall workers, a group of people at the police department, the communication workers, and others. And also we believe that there are a couple of other, and these typically are union contracts, a couple of contracts are going to be coming forward in the next couple of weeks that will also incorporate this change. So it is very, very important that this be incorporated for all employees. But if we can do this, we can, as they say, bend the curve on these healthcare costs. Something else that's affecting our budget and putting a lot of pressure on is the fact that we are anticipating some loss of revenue, possibly some loss of tax value, some erosion of our commercial tax base, potentially as a result of COVID-19. We've received some abatement requests, and we won't get a final answer on that till starting April 1 of next year. That's when abatement requests, new abatement requests, post-COVID abatement requests would be due, and we'll see. But we are anticipating that potentially we could lose revenue there. Another thing that the state has hit us with, and this is just the absolute wrong time, is that the state of New Hampshire has informed us that they are raising the city's pension bill by $4.4 million, starting next July 1. Now, $4.4 million is 2% on the tax rate. I already told you that the healthcare increases equate with 3% on the tax rate. Now, this thing is another 2%. Put all that together, that's a 5% increase just based on those two things. This is the totally wrong time to hit us with something like this. You may realize that city employees are in the state pension system. And the way that happened was the state offered to pay 35% of all the city costs for pensions if the municipalities across the state would enter the state pension system. Now, this happened about 50 years ago, and almost all municipalities joined. Well, they did pay the 35% for quite a few years, but then a few years back, they reduced their contribution from 35 to 30 to 25 to 0. So that is a big hit. Then they've mismanaged the system so that they came down in the amount that they have on hand, their so-called, the assets that they hold. And now they're trying to build up their assets, and they're charging the cities and towns incredible amounts of money to do that. So we're anticipating that if the legislature doesn't give us some relief with this, the state that our pension, the check we will send to the state of New Hampshire for next fiscal year will be over $29 million. So $29 million of the hardworking, the money of the hardworking taxpayers of Nashua will be sent to the state to help support the pension system. Now, there's far more than, there's enough money there. It's not like they're about to run out of money. They have $7.5 billion in the bank in their investments. They have enough money to pay all the benefits. And we could talk through more of the details. It's very detailed, but in essence, the way it really affects us day to day is this is going to be a $4.4 million increase. We're working with the legislature to try to change this, and with our legislative delegation, and they're going to be introducing bills to try to change this. But we, of course, need to see what the legislature does before we know how it's going to come out. Another thing that's going on is we have the city master plan. We're calling it Imagine Nashua. We have the city's master plan going forward. That's just beginning. Now, the master plan takes a look at the community. We involve many citizens in this master plan review. And we ask you and all citizens of Nashua, what would you like our community, our city to be? And we look at various neighborhoods in the city, the downtown, other neighborhoods, and specific parcels like the Daniel Webster College. And we try to formulate a long-term plan as to how these areas of the city should evolve or develop. We have a committee, a citizens committee, helping to guide us in this effort. We've had one public meeting so far that was virtual, and there certainly will be a lot more. And I encourage you all to participate in as many of these meetings as you can. The committee, the citizens committee, is headed by a woman named Amber Logue, and it includes citizens from all of our wards. And that is an exciting project that will be undertaking over the next 6 to 9 months. Another project is we are beginning to implement the city's riverfront master plan. The river, of course, is a very beautiful body of water, a very beautiful asset that, as you, of course, flows through the middle of downtown. In fact, we are a river city. We're named after the river. The first step that you will see, although we've removed a lot of the undergrowth so you can actually see the river now, but the next step will be lighting that will be along the walkways, the river walks from the west of the Main Street Bridge, up to the Cotton Transfer Bridge, which is that walking bridge that goes across the river between two of the mill buildings. And that bridge will be lit as well. And we expect that this project will begin very soon. So you will see some, and there are other changes in design. There's a Riverfront master plan on the website, which you can refer to. And I think if you take a look at it, you will see that there's some very dramatic, some very beautiful changes that we're looking forward to along the Nashua River. Now, going back to COVID-19, why don't I ask Bobby Bagley to give us a brief, introduce herself and tell us briefly what you're doing and what public health is doing regarding the COVID-19 epidemic.
Thank you, Mayor. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, and thank you, and thank you for inviting me to be here with you for the Ward 6 Town Hall meeting. Hello, everyone. I'm Bobby Bagley, the Director for our Division of Public Health and Community Services, and the Mayor has done a fantastic job telling you about what our numbers look like in Nashua. We currently in our state are at a substantial percent of cases that are coming through, and the whole state now is red. And so what that means is that we're at a heightened level of response and mitigation for our state to try and reduce the COVID spread that we're seeing right now. As the Mayor did discuss already, the expectation of this spike was expected. I guess for most of us, in public health, we didn't expect it to exponentiate so quickly. The numbers that we're seeing right now far exceed what we saw even at the height of our pandemic in March, and even when we had our little dip over the summer, and then we had a little rise. This has exponentiated very, very quickly for us. And so the all hands on deck approach to mitigation is back in effect for not just us at the local level, but at the state level as well. We've had over 200 cases reported over the past 7 days, which is pretty significant in our state. And for us down in Nashua, the Mayor talked about the 150 active cases that we learned about on Monday. Today is Thursday, and we have kind of exceeded that a little bit. And we are now looking at, let me see, today we got 34 extra cases reported today. So the state has changed the plans and how we're going to respond to this epidemic, because it is, the cases are coming in so quickly. It's hard for the state to keep track of doing their case investigations. And we were on a call today where the state announced prioritizing our case investigations as well as our contact tracing, because it's gotten out of control at this point right now. New Hampshire still does not look as bad as the rest of the country. In fact, in El Paso, they're in such dire straits that they've had to open up their alternative care centers already because their hospitals are overwhelmed. We have not gotten to that point. Our hospitals are at a place where they are able to manage what they're seeing currently, because our cases are still pretty mild. We do have people that end up in the hospital. We are still seeing deaths, which is very, very heartbreaking and unfortunate for the families that are losing their loved ones to this disease. And our major emphasis right now, we're going to still try and slow this thing down. And the best way that we can do that is with getting everyone to take personal responsibility by wearing masks, by social distancing, by staying home when they're sick, by even getting tested if they have the very mildest of symptoms right now, because we are in cold season, we are in flu season, we are in allergy season, and this little bugger of a virus, it presents itself so mildly that people, will have just a tickle in their throat, may have sinus pressure of a headache, but not really feel like they have COVID, or people are not recognizing that as COVID. And so they continue to go to work, they continue to go in spaces where other people are being exposed to them. And that's why we're seeing the number of cases that we're seeing and the contacts. We're seeing anywhere between 40 to 60% of households being infected, and all of the family members in the household becoming infected with the kids, if it's a multi-generational family, the grandparents as well. So that's how much of an extreme change that we've seen in these past couple of months. We, with the changes that the state has just rolled out, and the governor did a press conference on this, and the commissioner talked about it today, we're going to start prioritizing the cases that we are investigating, and that's going to be those under the age of 18, those over the age of 65, those that are in congregate settings like nursing homes, hospitals, children's homes, homeless shelters, individuals that are homeless. And because we have seen such an increase in the number of our people of color in Nashua and Manchester and across the state, that's also our prioritized population as well. And our numbers in Nashua have been significantly high in our Latino population because of the multifamily dwelling situations. And so we're having a lot of contacts in that population group. So we're asking our community to work with us. We're asking for folks, especially now because the holidays are coming on, to really think about not traveling if they don't have to, if it's not essential to not travel, to stay at home as much as possible to reduce exposure, order out from restaurants so that we could keep the businesses thriving, but not frequent them as much if you don't have to again, reduce exposure or opportunity of exposure of this virus. Again, we can't stress it enough that if people have underlying health conditions, are over the age of 65, have immunocompromised people at home, that these are folks that we would really like to limit their activities in the public and activities that are outside of individuals in the family unit. We're working as hard as we can, as the mayor said. We're working long hours, and we're going to do everything that we can to help keep our community safe, to keep you aware and informed of everything that's happening and of all the changes that are taking place and all the measures that we need to keep ourselves safe. Thank you, Mayor, for your support, and we're just going to continue to work hard.
All right, well, thank you, Bobby. And why don't we turn to a couple of the questions we received in advance. We did get some written questions, as we said. I see that Deborah Rapsis is on the call, so or on our meeting here. So I ask her question. She had asked, how is the construction project at Fairgrounds Middle School going? Is it on budget and on schedule? The brief answer is that the project is ahead of schedule and under budget. Some items may not be completed until the spring, but we have Alderman Rick Dowd, who is chairman of the Joint Special School Building Committee. That's a committee that is required by state law to supervise any school construction projects. And it's made up of a group of members of the Board of Aldermen and a group of members of the school board. This committee is chaired by Rick, and they oversee the project, looking at all the details, meeting periodically, approving all the payments, etc. But why don't I turn it over to Rick so that he can elaborate on what's being done and how the project is doing at the present time.
So the project's going very well. The reason we're sort of ahead of schedule is because with the children not being in the school and not having to work around children in the classrooms, we're able to get a lot more work done ahead of schedule, which is good from a cost standpoint. We have had to do a couple of items in the school projects that weren't originally planned. One most notably is in both the Fairgrounds and Pennachuck schools. We spent the funds to clean the ventilation systems so that the air being circulated is as clean as possible, particularly with the COVID. By January, we just found out today that it does not look like there will be students in school in the middle schools until January. And at that point in time, we will be over 95% completed with the work that needs to be done in Fairgrounds. The work that will need to be done in the spring is a couple of items outside. One of the areas in the traffic areas, the median strips will be putting down black mulch and pea stone. And the final coat of paving on the bus loop and the small parking lot to the east side of the school will be final top coated. Also, the grass areas in the front of the school have irrigation lines run through them. We'll be putting in the sprinkler heads and the backflow valves and all the rest of the plumbing that goes along with the sprinkler systems in the spring. So things are going very well. We had a meeting there today going over the progress, and I think that people will be quite amazed at the change on the interior of the school when they get to see it. It's going to now function much more smoothly as a middle school versus the old junior high school. And a lot of that has to do with team teaching and things that are now middle school standards. So if there are any specific questions, I can answer them. The other thing that was done was we redid the road around the school so that it's accessible to emergency vehicles, and the road is wide enough for the fire trucks to be able to access the school in case of any emergency.
All right, well, thank you, Rick. And of course, this is part of a middle school upgrade that is being done across the city. We're looking at the project to replace the Elm Street School with a new school down in the Southwest, of course, has been approved and will begin next year. Also, there's some work being done at Pennachuck to upgrade the Pennachuck Middle School. So the idea is to strengthen our middle school infrastructure, improve all of our middle schools, and also at the same time, we hope that the Board of Ed school department will be focusing on our middle school students in terms of curriculum and education in general, and because we want an excellent education for every student in every school every day, and we want to make sure that that's happening in our middle schools. Now, I spoke about the master plan very briefly at the beginning. We have Sarah Marchant, who's I see she's gotten on the meeting. She is the Director of Community Development and is most involved with the master plan. And she didn't hear what I had to say, but I basically told her I basically talked about, the general approach. We have a citizens committee. We're hoping to get as many people involved as we can, but maybe you could give, just from your point of view, what we're hoping to accomplish with the master plan, which I did not mention is the first time we've done this in 20 years. So the last master plan was in 2000. Now we're undertaking a new one. So Sarah, why don't you give us your perspective?
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everybody. Sarah Marchant, Community Development Director. So what is a master plan? Why is it important, right? A master plan is basically, it's your vision. It's the community's vision for how do you want Nashua to grow in the next couple of years, right? Certainly, if you think about where we were 20 years ago, in the early 2000s, Nashua as a city looks pretty different. And how we grew, how land changed, how we developed, where the traffic is, how the roads are laid out, all of that vision of how we allowed through the land use code was set by the master plan. And so we're redoing this as we desperately need to. We're in a very different place now, and we're essentially a redevelopment city at this point. And so having your ideas and your vision of what you want to see, what do you love, what do you want us to keep the same, and what are things that we could do better is incredibly important to us, making sure that as we grow and develop in the future, we do so in a way that reflects you, the community's values and goals. And so that's what this process is about. It's about talking about high level, bigger ideas. And then at the other end of this process, next fall, we'll be taking all of this, what we come up with in the master plan, and we'll be translating that into an update of the land use code so that we reflect those values that the community has stated in the master plan, in the land use code. Some examples of what happened in the past are, right, last time we prioritized the need for additional conservation land and trails and outdoor space. That was a huge thing that we hadn't invested heavily in, and that the community said we need to do better at. So since that time, we have invested in over 1,200 acres of conservation land. We've created 48 miles of trails, right? These are huge, important changes. The whole Southwest Quad, right? We had Mine Falls Park. We didn't have the Northwest Territory. So those are some of the kind of things that happen based on what we hear from you in this process. And so being in COVID, it's really hard to show up at your neighborhood parties or to go to the library and see if we can talk to you or meet up with people. So we really are trying to do a lot of this digitally. And if you could please take a minute or 5 minutes and go to imagine.nashua.nh.gov, imagine.nashua.nh.gov. We have, that's the home page for the master plan. And you can check out the meetings that we've had so far and presentations. We have a little bit of data going on up there, but we have a survey trying to understand, what do you think about the future? So there's a bunch of questions in this survey. And as you start clicking through the survey, it doesn't take long. You'll see it starts with just one question and you say, do you agree or disagree with that question? Oh, thank you. Carrie just put it in the chat. And then you'll get more questions. If you answer 6 questions, all of your ideas will be counted, but you can also then add your own questions. If you're answering these questions and you're like, I really think that one of the questions that's on there is that we should have music events at Holman. And if you really think that that's important or not important, you fill out that survey, but you can add your own question that is something important to you, or your own statement that we should continue to conserve more lands, or we have enough land, we need to do something different with traffic. We need to do something different here. You make these statements and the community is saying approving or disapproving. And so we're using that to kind of measure the vision. The next step here will be really starting to talk about topics. Housing. Housing is incredibly important. And we just had a housing study that shows, we're very short on housing units. I'm sure everybody feels the pinch. We don't have enough affordable. We don't have enough housing of all the different types. And so how do we add more housing, but do so in a way that respects how you feel about the community? So we'll be talking about housing, mobility, transportation. We'll be talking about arts and culture. We'll be talking about all kinds of topics as the next phase, but right now we're envisioning. So I'll wrap it up, get excited and talk forever. If you could please go to imagine.nashua.nh.gov and check out the survey. All the information on the master plan now and for the next 9 months is there. And if you have questions, if you want to sign up, if you want to get emails, or if you just want to take surveys occasionally and help give us feedback, we would greatly appreciate it. Oh, we can't hear you, Mayor.
Sorry, I went on mute. We have gotten a question about Lake Street, I think from Sandra Pratt. Sandra, I think, is on the call or on our meeting. We hope to finish Lake Street by the spring of 2021, but there is gas work that needs to be done in the street. So often we work with the utilities to make sure that they finish up their work underneath the street before it's finally paved. And we believe there's going to be some gas work done, which we want to make sure gets completed before we actually do the final paving in that section of the road. But I'm going to ask Lisa Foto, who's the Director of Public Works, who's not on the call here, to call you, Sandra, and tell you directly about the progress and the timeline for the project, for the paving of Lake Street. Now, Sandra has also asked about loose manhole covers. These can be very problematic because when cars run over them and they make a clanking sound, it can be very irritating for those who live nearby. And I know that, and I think Sandra is saying that that also takes place on Lake Street. Now, the manhole covers get loose with age, and then they begin to move around and can have the effect that I just mentioned. So we are going to ask Public Works to examine the manhole covers around your neighborhood and see if they can locate any loose ones and try to tighten those up. I mean, with a little bit of work, they can be tightened up. And if you have specific ones that you think are problematic, when Lisa gives you a call, please tell her where those are, and we can try to, Public Works will try to address them. Now back to COVID-19. I think Suzanne Kay, who's on the call, Carrie tells me, asked a question about, are there hospitalizations taking place? Are people in the hospital as a result of COVID-19? And the answer is yes. We have a weekly call, and we may have to make that more often, but at one point we were doing it daily. Now it's weekly with the hospitals, and they report to Bobby, Director of Public Health, myself, and a lot of other people from the community as to how they're doing with COVID-19. We're now seeing more than 10 people in Nashua are in the hospital as a result of COVID-19. During the summer, that got down to very low single numbers, 2 or 3. We've seen it as high as almost 20, but that number is definitely rising. Now, I have to say that their capacity is much more than that. We've worked with the hospitals, and they can accommodate a lot more than 10 people with COVID-19. We see that the hospitals in some parts of the country are really almost overwhelmed with the number of COVID-19 patients. The doctors and nurses, the staff are just working 24 hours a day trying to help people, and we do not want to get to that situation. That's why we're trying to limit the spread of the virus. We're trying to get into as much prevention as we possibly can. And because we don't want the same kind of thing that we see occurring like in the Dakotas and in Minnesota right now, we don't want that happening in Nashua. So we will continue to monitor the situation. At one point in the spring, we opened, in conjunction with the state of New Hampshire, another care site out at Nashua South, and we were going to put if there was an overflow, the whole community, the hospitals were very involved and were supervising this work, but they were going to send less sick patients to this alternative care site, it was called, out at the high school, but that was not needed, so that was disassembled. Now, I think that's what's happening is that as we've gotten deeper into the coronavirus pandemic, the medical community, our doctors and nurses, our hospitals, have learned how to treat it, and they are better at treating the disease than they were right at the beginning. And therefore, I think the success rate and the hospitalization rate is going to be lower, but still, as the number of cases rise, we know that a certain proportion of those people will end up in the hospital. And again, we've had about 41 people in Nashua die from coronavirus. 41 families have been, suffered a grievous loss. And the COVID-19, anyone dying from COVID-19, I mean, it is a bad way to pass away, because oftentimes the person is on a ventilator. Oftentimes the person can't be visited by friends or relatives, even close relatives, because of the risk of transmission. So it's very, very painful for the family, and can be very, very heart-wrenching. And so we reach out and feel for all of those families, and we don't want people in the hospital with COVID-19 if we can possibly avoid it. That's why we ask you to wear your masks, make sure you socially distance, even around the holidays. We have heard that, and of course this is a big sacrifice, but my wife and I have, of course, our daughter in California. We will not be seeing her over the holidays. That's a sacrifice that we're making, but we've all made sacrifices because we're trying to keep everyone safe, and we don't want to be transporting this disease around the country. So if you're having people over for Thanksgiving, maybe consider limiting the number of people, maybe wear masks in the house, because we've seen around the country that family gatherings are one primary way where the disease gets transmitted. People feel safe. They think that nothing's going to happen, but it can. So you you've really, please try to be careful. And maybe if we can get through one holiday season with these kind of limitations, if we can get the vaccine and get people vaccinated for by next year, then next holiday season we'll be able to go back to the family celebrations that we of course all enjoy. Carrie, do you have any other questions from people?
Hi, everyone. I do have a couple of other questions in the chat, but before I get to those, I wanted to see if there's anyone who hasn't asked a question yet. If you wanted to have a chance, we have some folks who have asked questions in the chat that have already asked one or two, so I just wanted to see if there's anyone else who has something.
Mayor, Tim Cummings here. I just wanted to say a few words if I could, when you get a moment.
Okay, well, Tim Cummings is the Economic Development Director for the city, working very hard to create better career opportunities for our young people and just grow our tax base and grow our economy. So yes, Tim, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, Tim Cummings, Director of Economic Development. So relative to the economic profile for the city of Nashua right now, particularly during COVID, I just want to make sure folks know that we are actively monitoring and watching how businesses are acting and behaving during these stressful times. I'm proud to say, at least at this time, our industries have been very supportive and proactive in their management to make sure that there were not as many displacements as one would think. We have had we benefit from having a very diverse industrial base. So we have in the businesses that we do have here have weathered the storm relatively well, between information technology, defense, manufacturing, life science. All these various industries have performed better than expectations. That's not to say that we aren't immune from this. Some of our smaller businesses have been definitely impacted, and some of our service-based businesses, people typically think of restaurants, have definitely been impacted. A lot of our human services nonprofits have been impacted. We have adopted some strategies along the way to try to help blunt this as much as possible. Between community development and economic development, very early on in May, we created a program to help push money out onto the street, particularly before the federal programs were up and running. I'm proud to say that more than 50 loans and grants were given out to businesses and nonprofits that were in need of this support, this financial assistance, in particular before they were able to get access to some of the more traditional programs that were up and running, like the PPP. We also took other measures like creating outdoor dining and expanding that so people could use the outdoor dining both on the private land that they may have if they were so fortunate, or on the public land, particularly on Main Street. So anyway, I wanted to just bring some of those things up. One other thing we did, as I think about it, is we did a bulk purchasing program, coordinated actually through Kim Kleiner, Administrative Services, who's on this call here this evening. I appreciate Kim's efforts on this front. We were able to get PPE out to a lot of the small businesses and nonprofits through a bulk purchasing, which, supply chain was obviously a concern very early on, and then just making sure that we could provide this PPE at a price point that folks could afford. We were able to use the weight and the organization of the city to help some of these businesses. So I wanted to just highlight some of those more broader Nashua economic activities that have occurred, but then specifically in Ward 6, over the next year or so, we're going to be looking at redeveloping the Elm Street Middle School. So an RFP will be issued shortly for a feasibility study, sometime probably just after the first of the year, where we'll be looking to get community input into how we're going to be looking to redevelop that school. And the other thing I wanted to mention this evening was, and I'd ask you to follow up with me if this is of interest to you, but I want to tease it. We're going to be in a January type timeframe having a conversation about overnight parking. And in Ward 6, I'd like to get people's thoughts as to whether overnight parking should be occurring in your neighborhood. If this is something that you're interested in, please feel free to reach out. Best way to do that is to email parking@nashwanh.gov. And we will add you to the distribution list to let you know when we'll be having a community outreach meeting in the month of January to discuss this very specific topic. At any rate, Mayor, just wanted to mention those few things, and thanks for having me.
Thank you, Tim. And we are working very hard to try to help our small businesses. We know that they've been really hurt, or especially at the beginning of the pandemic, regarding with the shutdowns and everything. The outdoor dining has gone very well. We think it's really activated the downtown and certainly has helped the small businesses, the restaurants and others downtown. Michael Buckley, who owns a couple of the restaurants, has said that he thinks we saved a number of businesses by doing that. We acted very quickly, I have to say, the Board of Aldermen and the administration to enable that outdoor dining, and I think that's gone very well. But the loan pool has also helped quite a bit as well. I think Deborah also asked about the enforcement of traffic, speeding, traffic problems. And we went to the police department and, touched base with, we spoke with them about that, as we often do. The chief, Kerrigan, assures us that they do have patrols out proactively enforcing traffic laws, although he says that they slowed it down when COVID first started because they didn't have enough PPE or personal protective equipment, and they wanted to make sure that the officers were protected from potential exposure. But now he says they're definitely out there. Now, if you have specific complaints about a specific area, the best thing is to call the PD and tell them. And the chief will follow up with you, or someone will, and try to identify exactly where the problem is taking place, set up the appropriate measure, whether it be a speed trap or something else, in an effort to try to make sure that the traffic laws are enforced and that we don't have excessive speeding. I mean, one I think interesting aspect of the outdoor dining, speaking just of the speeding on Main Street, is it has really slowed the traffic down and it's much more pedestrian friendly. You don't have people, now occasionally there's a bit of a backup, but overall people can get through, but we don't have people driving at 50 miles an hour down Main Street as maybe we did at times before. And in some of our neighborhoods, we want to look at ways to potentially use more of the public street for pedestrians and to help, especially where things are very congested, and to slow down the traffic so it's more pedestrian, resident, neighborhood friendly than simply a speedway for cars traveling through the neighborhood. Now, Carrie, do we have any other questions that you've seen in the chat or anywhere else?
Yes, Mayor, we have a question actually from Sandra again in the chat. Mayor and probably Bobby, you'd be able to definitely answer this. Sandra wants to know if someone gets COVID, can they get it again?
Well, my information, having talked with the medical experts, but Bobby can elaborate if she wishes, sure, is we don't know for sure. There's likely to be. Go ahead, Bobby.
I was going to say it's not very common, but we have had a couple of cases, in Nashville where people have gotten COVID twice. And it's usually once a person gets COVID, their body produces antibodies so that if the virus is reintroduced to them, their body can fight it off. However, we have had at least 2 that I'm aware of where they came in contact with the virus again and they became ill, and they were actually sicker the second time around. That doesn't usually happen. Usually, again, the body does mount an antibody response and protects the person, from getting sick again the second time around. So it's not uncommon, but it's not something that happens very often.
So there might be some degree of immunity, which might last for a temporary period of time.
Correct.
But anybody who's had COVID, I would not assume that you're immune. I mean, as Bobby said, the second case can be worse than the first. I would continue to take all of the precautions you've been taking all the way along. I mean, once a tested vaccine, one that they really understand how effective it is and how much protection it provides, once that is developed safely, once you gain enough confidence that you can, have the vaccine, then you will have some level of protection and you'll have a better understanding of how much that protection is. But until that happens, I don't think anybody who's had COVID can assume that they're never going to get it again, or that they're safe for any particular period of time.
That is correct, Mayor. And we're asking people to continue, even if they've had the virus, continue to wear your mask, continue to social distance. And they're even expecting that even once people get vaccinated, that we'll still maintain some of those behaviors until, again, like you said, Mayor, we know the confidence of the vaccine and the uptake and how it works in our bodies. So we still want to continue to maintain that vigilance with safety.
Carrie, any other questions that you've seen?
Yep, I have one more question from Deborah again, and it's COVID related. She's asking, are there certain activities that are contributing to COVID in the city, like kids being in a school, or does it have anything to do with the weather?
So that is a great question. And we have been seeing that it's more related to the activities that we engage in as, community members. We track what we call clusters and outbreaks. And anytime there's 1 to 2 cases or more, the state has been tracking those. And that number has started out at the earlier part of the week, about 170 something, and now it's well over 250. And the majority of those have been related to activities that have involved the schools. And we've been fortunate in Nashua that it's only been a few of our schools, and across the state, it's been the schools where the kids are back in school, either in hybrid form or going to school, on a regular basis, where we've seen those clusters and those outbreaks occurring. Some of the outbreaks have occurred being related to a hockey league that started in September, and they started play, and that was a huge spread of infection across the state with the hockey leagues. And again, Nashua was fortunate that we only had a few individuals that were impacted by that. They played on these outside hockey leagues, but we didn't have our schools in full session, so it didn't impact our schools the way that it could have if the kids were in school. And so it's our personal activities. There have been outbreaks in places where people are gathered together more closely, in some of our restaurant settings. And so again, we're asking people to, if they don't have to go out to eat, to try, to order out, that's safer, or if they can enjoy outdoor dining as much as they can, to continue to do that. But anytime there's activities where there's numbers of people gathered together, that increases the opportunity for infection. We've seen it at parties. People have had private birthday parties. They've had weddings. We've had an outbreak at a church. And so any place where there's lots of people gathered together, we've seen these outbreaks and these increases in cases. They have said that so far, the CDC talked about the weather doesn't really have that much of an impact. It's just our social behaviors and gathering together in close settings, and not using the social distancing the way that we need to. That was a great question.
All right.
Anything else, Carrie?
We have a couple of other questions from Sandra, and one is, what about grocery stores? Do they have special cleaning guidelines that they need to follow as far as COVID goes?
Yes, we're recommending grocery stores, all businesses, that they do what we call contact surface cleaning on a regular basis, on a very frequent basis, in places where people are commonly using certain like the cash registers or the punch pads, that those places are sprayed down and wiped down, disinfected frequently in most of the business places. And, you know, Tim talked about how our businesses have been working. Our folks have been working really hard at keeping surfaces clean so that we can reduce the virus on contact in those areas. The biggest way to actually really stop the spread of the infection is to wear the mask and do the social distancing and the washing of the hands with hand sanitizer or, you know, with soap and water on a very frequent basis.
Thank you, Bobby. Carrie, do we have others?
All right. I've got a question about, is it possible to charge a fee for someone who has a lot of like trash or disabled cars and junk kind of items like in their yard? Is that?
Well, I don't know if Sarah is still on this call, but she supervises code enforcement. So there are various rules that apply to people's property. The law regarding unregistered cars is that you can have up to two unregistered cars on your property, but beyond that, it violates the city's ordinances, and people can be ticketed and fined for maintaining a junkyard or something like that beyond the two cars. As far as the look of the property, it depends. I think Sarah would have to get into the details, which I don't see her, so we could follow up with whoever is asking that question. But there are certain rules which need to be followed depending on what the problem is and what how it can be, what needs to be done to correct it.
All right, awesome. Thank you. That's all I see for the chat. Does anyone else have anything else they would like to ask? You can either type it in the chat or raise your hand.
Oh,
I see
Suzanne.
Suzanne.
Hi, thank you, Jim, for doing this. I did write it in the chat and it came up privately, so I don't know if you wanted me to say it or not, but is there any, as COVID goes on and should it continually get worse, is there any, do you have any legal power to mandate masks? And then if people don't follow it, to fine them?
Well, the answer is yes, and we have enacted a mask ordinance, which requires that anyone who goes to a public place, like an indoor space, like a store, a restaurant, an office, is required to wear a mask. And businesses which accept, have customers coming in are required to ask their patients and require their patients to, their customers to wear masks. And of course, the reasons for that is that the mask face covering protects both parties, if you're infected and you don't know it, it protects other people, but if other people are in that situation, it protects you from them. It limits the spread of the virus. And I have to say that the vast majority of businesses, of people in Nashua have done a very, good job of complying. There have been a couple of instances where there's been a refusal. The police department can issue a summons in that case, and I think they've done it in a couple of occasions, over the last number of months. But normally the police department is involved in diplomacy as opposed to any kind of punitive measure. They counsel people, they ask people, and generally that works. And so the PD has the authority, and they're the only ones who can do this, has the authority to issue a summons, but they have done it on a couple of occasions. Now, any kind of fine needs to be imposed by the court. I mean, the police department has the authority
Okay.
to ask for a fine, but they can't levy a fine.
All right.
Overall, I think we're, as a community, doing very well and in making sure that the mask ordinance is complied with.
Good. Thank you, Jim. Tim, I have one question for you. You talked about a school that, I didn't catch the name of the school that you're looking at to do something with.
That's the Elm
Yes,
Street
the-
Middle School.
Yeah, the Elm Street Middle School.
Oh, yes.
So once the new school is built, of course, we'll have a very major building that, you know, is empty except for the Keefe Auditorium.
Right.
And we want to develop a good plan because we want to make sure the Keefe Auditorium can still be used and is retained in city use. But the question is, what do we do with the remainder of the building? Now, it's
Elderly housing.
possible.
Elderly housing.
Possible that housing would be, I mean, that is housing is a natural possibility. You've seen a lot of our older buildings in the city converted to housing. Clock Tower Place, Cotton Mill, as well as the Franklin Street Mill, the former National Court building. And certainly before that, the Temple Street School, you might remember that going way back, and others. Temple Street went to senior housing. And so that's what we're going to be looking at, try to get people's input and come up with the best plan we possibly can for the Elm Street Middle School.
Okay, thank you. Good
No, I
job.
don't.
Mhm.
Thank you. Thank you, Suzanne, for attending. And thank you all
Mayor,
for
we have
attending,
we have one new question in the chat.
which is,
It's from Steve Blunt. Steve says there's lots of new homeless tents popping up at Mine Falls Park, and how can we help?
well, the homeless, thank you, Steve, for the question. The homeless, our homeless population is certainly a group of people that we want to assist to get into housing. I mean, there's no question about it. The city, along with Harbor Homes, has worked very hard on the issue of veterans homelessness. We were several years ago certified by the VA, Veterans Administration, as what they call functional zero for homeless veterans, meaning there were no homeless veterans who were out there who weren't offered a place to live. And we need to try to achieve a similar result for non-veteran homeless. This is a problem, as you've observed, it's growing here, but in Manchester, it's they have many more homeless people than we have in Nashua. One thing that we're looking forward to is we are hoping that the soup kitchen is successful in establishing the family homeless shelter on Spring Street. One way you could help is to get involved with them, and I think they're close to raising the funds that they need to do that. And that would be for families and for and for some number of individuals that aren't connected with the family. Another thing that we have been very encouraged by and we're working hard on is that the former Infant Jesus School, which closed a year or so ago, has been leased by the church to what's called Family Promise. It's a very successful nonprofit that offers temporary, but more than a few nights, and we're talking 6 months or a year, housing for families who are, don't have a place to live. But they, in addition to providing a place for the family to live, they have a lot of services, job counseling, daycare, childcare, and other services that help the adults get back on their feet, find a job, begin to earn a living, get a car, get whatever is necessary to enable them to support themselves in the community. Now, the Family Promise was formerly in Hudson, but they were not able to stay there. They've been there for quite a few years, but now they're moving to Nashua, and the work on that conversion is going on right now. And they may be able to occupy that former Infant Jesus School by the beginning of 2021. We had a ceremony there, a so-called groundbreaking ceremony, but really the work had already begun a couple of weeks ago. The bishop was there, the governor was there, and so that's a very promising project. We need to keep working on all of these projects to try to make sure that everybody in Nashua who needs a place to live has one. Also, the Greater Nashua Continuum of Care, which is an organization of social service nonprofits, and our city welfare department under Bob Mack are working with the homeless population and trying to locate places for them to live in the various places around the city where temporary or more permanent housing is available. And thank you for your questions, Steve. Well, if that is all, we try to finish up, it's not too much more than an hour on these Zoom meetings because having gone through many Zoom meetings, they do get old and they're not quite as good as meeting in person. I mean, we wish we could meet in person. Hopefully next year we can do the Ward 6 Town Hall in person as we have in the past. But we appreciate your input. We appreciate your questions. Please continue to keep in touch with any concerns. You can get involved with the master plan. That would be great. We of course love to hear from you, and we want to be responsive and accountable, and we want to make sure that your neighborhood is continues to be a great neighborhood to live in, and one where people can raise a family and just have a wonderful life. So thank you for attending, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.